Good evening, everyone. Let's bow in. And welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course on the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. We're on Volume 3, Chapter 14. Tonight, Unconditional Ground. This is quite a chapter. And I'm going to let Michael take it away.
A challenging chapter, both because of the material itself, and I think also partly due to the nature of the way in which the compendium box was prepared. If we were to actually be attending one of the seminaries, there'd be a sequence of talks, and I think some of the material in this chapter might make a little more sense or be easier to follow if we'd heard the talk previous. So we'll do the best we can. I was thinking earlier, remembering how Trungpa Rinpoche used to say often, especially in later times, that your guess is as good as mine. And I think I've shared once before that finally someone said, well, I can't help it where your guess is better. But in my case, your guess is definitely as good as mine in terms of some of this material. So, hoping it comes time for discussion and questions that people feel free to share whatever comments and thoughts they have. In any case, the chapter begins with some discussion of indestructible being. And I think a lot of what we're being asked to do, or what's being presented to us in this chapter, as it has been all along, is how can we recognize our true nature? What is our true nature, and how can we come to recognize that? And that as we practice meditation and come to rest in awareness, that we can actually experience that in as he would say, thoroughly, completely as possible. And that a lot of what's being presented in this chapter relates to exactly that. It's similar in a sense to what we might experience in meditation when we first sit and might notice some physical tension. But as we relax further, we might notice other levels of tension that we weren't aware of before. And in the same way, as we practice, we might come to notice increasingly subtler nature of ways in which we hold on, in which there's grasping and fixation, which he talks about in this chapter. And increasingly, as we recognize, be able to see that and let go of that. In any case, he begins by talking about indestructible being. Let's see what happens. Indestructible being, which he describes as Vajra existence or Vajra nature. And he says right away that none of the experiences of Vajrayana can occur if we don't understand the idea of Tathagata Garbha from the point of view of Mahayana. And if you remember from our Mahayana study, Tathagata Garbha basically translates as essence of the Buddha or womb of the Buddha. And the idea in Mahayana is that we possess this as an essence. Vajrayana takes this even further, as we read about before, and we'll hear it again in this chapter, to say that it's not just essence that we have, but that we actually are fully developed Buddhas if we can come to recognize that. But I think he's saying that we need to first understand the nature that this is something we actually possess. And we begin by doing this in glimpses and flashes and come to develop increasing confidence in that and increasingly able to identify with that. So he says that Vajra nature refers to an indestructible quality that we maintain and possess in our being. So that we're not talking about something that we need to bring in from the outside or something that we're lacking, but it's something that we already have. What makes it difficult to talk about, and it's interesting that this, the title of this chapter is Unconditional Ground, is that any words we use to describe it are going to be limited. They're maybe help point to the experience, but they're not the same as the experience. It's said that one of the problems with conceptual mind is the tendency for conceptual mind to mistake terms and labels for the actual experience. So that basically, in order to have the kinds of experiences that he's talking about, we need to let go of conceptual mind. We need to be open to what we actually experience, not our ideas about it, not our concepts of it, not the labels or terms for it, but the actual experience that we have from moment to moment. This next section was titled Neither Beginning Nor End. And he starts by saying, if we ask how egolessness and emptiness fit with the topic of Vajra indestructibility, the answer is that this intrinsic quality of our being is indestructible because it's non-existent. So that's quite a sentence to unpack, actually. Egolessness and emptiness are what we work with, what we come to recognize through the Hinayana in terms of egolessness, the non-substantiality of the ego of self. And emptiness is what we work with, what we come to discover, realize in the Mahayana in terms of shunyata. But the notion of indestructibility, the answer is this intrinsic quality, this inborn, innate, inherent quality of our being is indestructible because it's non-existent, which is very different from how we usually think of something that's... So let's continue. What Trungpa Rinpoche says is if this intrinsic nature, Vajra indestructibly, were something that's existent, there would be no question of indestructibility because it would have a form. And anything that has existence or form cannot possess Vajra nature. So what we're talking about here is essentially the ungraspable nature of awareness, the ungraspable nature of our inherent sanity, that we can use words to point to it, such as awareness, luminosity, clarity. And all of these point to experiences that we would have in meditation practice. But when we actually look at the experience itself, it's ungraspable in the sense that there's nothing that we can ultimately hold on to. As soon as we hold on to what we think is it, what we're actually holding on to is a concept about what it is. So that, again, we're back to that place where conceptual mind mistakes concept or label or idea for experience. So to go on with this, he says rupa in Sanskrit, or form, refers to that which has substantial existence and which therefore could be destroyed at any time. So anything that has form in this sense can be destroyed. This is, again, the idea that we've talked about in our previous Mahayana studies about the attributions that mind makes about seeing things as real. And that when we see something as real, what we say is that it's independent, that it's singular, and that it's permanent. And when we actually look at experiences, we realize that nothing really is permanent, singular, or independent. So the idea is that Vajra nature, our fundamental awareness, does not have its own entity, its own existence. It's ungraspable. At the same time, as we learned in the Mahayana, and again, this goes back to our study of the notion of Tathagata Garbha or Buddha nature, it's said to be unborn, unceasing, and non-dwelling. And when we actually look at the nature of awareness, where does it come from? It's not something we need to create. It's always there. It's something we can tune into. It doesn't come from anything else. It's just there. It's just here. It's us. We're fundamentally aware. And in that sense, it's unborn. And when we actually pay attention to our experience, we realize that in fact, we're always aware of something, even if we're not necessarily aware of our awareness, so that it's unceasing. And that it's non-dwelling in the sense that there's no one thing that permanently captures it. Otherwise, we'd always be thinking and feeling the same things. But in fact, the unborn, unceasing, non-dwelling aspect really just, it speaks to the non-existent nature of awareness. So with that, he begins talking about existence and manifesting. And he says, from this point of view, when we're able to actually see this open nature of mind, open, clear nature of mind, that samsara is nirvana from that point of view. That whether it's garbage or grass, it's the same. It's all sacred. You see everything as a manifestation of the Guru's world, which allows us to relax and maintain our upliftedness. And then he says because of that, we can work with things. Everything is workable. We can build up from garbage. We can clean up what needs to be cleaned up. But before we can clean up, the point is not to fight with ugly, unpleasant things, because that means we're labeling things as something to get rid of, as something outside of your capable world. And he says that's why we have Maitri practice first and compassion later on. But first, we begin by being able to accept our experience, whatever it is, just as it is, accept ourselves just as we are, however we are. And out of that, we develop compassion. And then he says that Vajra nature is complete invincibility because we don't need an essence to work with. We're fully developed. So at this point, we're really talking about the Vajrayana idea that it's not simply an essence that we have, but that we actually are fully developed Buddhists, that at any point in time, we can be completely awake. And he says, and the question then is, why practice? And the answer is the point of practice is to try to bring out the hang-ups of Mahayana. I would love to be able to ask him exactly what he means by the hang-ups of Mahayana, but I think what he's talking about here is the idea that we need to make something happen before we can wake up. The fact that I think he's talking about the fact that because sometimes we need to let go of confused and scattered mind, that we mistakenly believe that we create awareness rather than simply tuning into it. That we mistake just our capacity to settle down and open up to that we come to some belief that we actually need to make something happen, create a state of mind rather than just open up to our experience. And he says to experience the true form of Vajra existence, that we are already Buddha, that we need two aspects, which are ku and yeshe. The ku is the body aspect, it's solidity, it's the ground of sanity. And yeshe is jnana, or wisdom. And the yeshe is the shining out, or the celebration of that particular situation. So Sanskrit, or ku, is kaya, and yeshe is jnana. And he says they can't be separated. Existence and manifesting always happen together. And I think we could see that very simply, even in terms of shamatha vipassana practice, that with shamatha we settle in one place. We settle here. And then from that, vipassana opens up and shines out. And that ultimately it's vipassana that leads to prajna, that leads to jnana, as we'll, I think, see later in this chapter. So he says that this begins with glimpses of Vajra nature, that the Vajrayanist approach to Vajra experience is that we're here already, although it may just be a glimpse. So again, we're talking about coming to fully recognize what the nature of our awareness is. Or maybe a better way to put it is that we are awareness, that we just don't recognize that. Although in moments we have glimpses, that we can just be completely open. That we can relate to things, be in the world in a completely open, non-dual way, without any kind of separation between us and our experience. He says the idea is that these glimpses that we have are workable, and since they exist in us already,